So, did the Snow CAT make some money or was it a failure? Well, it's funny because if you look at how people talked about it online, they said it was an abject failure at first, but it did actually clear all three tiers. And so today we're going to talk about is the money side of the Hasbro Haslab when it comes to G.I. Joe Classified, because we have actually had 4 Hasbro Haslab Classified G.I. Joe Haslab projects. 2022, we had the Hiss Tank, which was an instant classic. You had the Dragonfly in 2023. 2024 is the Rattler, that I know some people are still waiting to get theirs. And 2025, we have the Snow CAT. And just in general, if we look at these 4 products, we can tell that, look, the Snow CAT is definitely not as, iconic as the Hiss Tank or the Rattler or even the Dragonfly, and the numbers kind of show out because we look at the final numbers, and I've gone back to Hasbro Pulse and looked at the actual final numbers that they still show, because you can still go find the Hiss Tank and the Dragonfly and the Rattler's numbers. Well, you think about it, the Snow CAT sold 16,437 units, which at $325 a pop means they made gross revenue was $5,342,025. Hey, not a bad chunk of change, especially for a company that's had to lay off a lot of its workers over the last couple of years. Now, the thing is, you look at that 5.3 million, you realize that's really good. But if you can compare it to last year's with the Rattler, priced at the same price, $325, the Rattler has been the most popular in terms of units sold and money made when it comes to Haslab projects, because they sold 26,903 at $325, which makes it $8,743,475. That means they made over $3 million more off the Rattler in terms of gross revenue than they did off the Snow CAT. So the Snow CAT compared to the Rattler, yeah, there's no way. Like, you look at the numbers, you look at the 10,000 less units, over $3 million less dollars. Yeah, so it's not as big as that. However, that Hasbro plans these things out, and they know, hey, we're making money no matter what tier it's at, as long as it makes, so you do have that. Now, if we start to compare these things, some people say, well, the Rattler was by far the most successful one. It had the biggest numbers. Well, let's think back to 2022, and if you look at those final numbers that Hasbro gives you, remember, 26,903 for the Rattler. Well, you know what? The Hiss Tank, 26,772. So literally like 30 less or so. I mean, you're looking at numbers that are like, wait, that's basically the same. However, the Hiss Tank was only $300 back then. So if you look at that, the Hiss Tank made $8,031,600 versus the $8,743,000 that the Rattler did. So yeah, it made more money. The Rattler made more money, sold more units. However, I think it's important to mention, let's think about in terms of how popular the Hasbro, the G.I. Joe Classified line has changed from 2022 to 2024. I mean, we're looking at a much more robust collector market, and people are very excited for it. And yes, scalpers and stuff in there too. But you start to look at it and say, wait, it is $700,000 less, but at $25 less per pop, maybe that Hiss Tank was actually more popular in terms of things versus the Rattler. Now, we don't have the numbers in terms of how much it cost them to make these products, so we can't say their net revenue, which one made the most money, but we can look at the gross revenue. Now, the Dragonfly, which for some reason has kind of become an afterthought for some people, the Dragonfly actually sold 24,764, which is a good number. But remember, that was also the cheapest Haslab so far at $275, which means it made about $6.8 million in gross revenue. Still $1.5 million better than the Snow CAT. So again, looking overall in terms of volume numbers, in terms of money numbers, yes, the Snow CAT has definitely been the last. However, I would not say it's a failure, because when you look at the situation that we're in terms of collectors when the Snow CAT came out versus the Hiss Tank or Rattler, we're looking at space on people's shelves, economic uncertainty for a lot of people, the money side of it, and all those pre-orders. Because back in the day, the Hiss Tank didn't have that many pre-orders that people were waiting on. I mean, literally, we have videos talking about the thousands of dollars that people had, in terms of pre-orders waiting for them, that is like waiting to suck it out of your bank account. And I know one of our fans, Rob, I mean, he had a bunch of pre-orders come due, and it's like, look, I can't do it. I can't do that, the Haslab Snow CAT, and have all those pre-orders going. So there's a lot of things that kind of happened in that way. Now, what I want to kind of look at is, let's look at how things kind of rolled out for these different Haslab numbers. Because if you think about it, the most important, there's two important days when it comes to Haslabs. The first day and the last day. Because, if you ever look at those charts, it's like first day, and then the 44 days in between, and then the last couple days, right? It's like, then shoots up again. So we look at it in terms of most popular first day, with and these are approximate numbers, because getting the first day numbers is sometimes tough. The first day for the His tank was 9,500. That kind of totals, that's 35%. So first day was 35% of the entire sales when it came to the His tank. All right, so they had that. Now, you think that's high? Well, that is the highest. At 34%, you have the Dragonfly, which had about 8,500 sold its first day, which was 34% of it. Now, going to the Rattler. Now, the Rattler, I could see why Hasbro might have been a little worried at first, because the Rattler had about 6,800 on the first day, which was only 25% of the total number that was there, which is one of those kind of scary things. Like, what do we need to inspire people? That the patches controversy didn't hurt. You'd think they'd learn that you can't mess with the tiers. Like, the His tank tiers and the Dragonfly tiers were excellent and inspired people to buy. However, I will say having 4 characters with the His tank and 4 characters with the Dragonfly probably impacted the Rattler in terms of costs. And so, hey, we need to mitigate those costs, because we eliminate a figure. It's $25 for us, but it's probably, $5, $10 for them. So it's a lot more profit for them to like throw in some patches versus, another character. Now, Snow CAT itself, remember, only has 2 extra characters and 2 characters in the bivouac, which I'm proud I can finally say. So we start looking at these things. So 25%. Now, for the Snow CAT, since it had about 16,000 in total, it had 5,069 its first day. So about 5,000 the first day, which is 31%. So if we start looking at this percent of first day, we get a rough idea that it's about 35% of what we have on the first day is what we're going to, kind of end up with overall. So we know when we look at the first day sales of whatever next year's, Haslab is, I'm hoping for the hydrofoil, the moray. That's what I'm hoping for. You got to realize that first day, about a third of it, you have a rough idea there, okay? And the thing is, it's kind of like when you look at movies, they'll say, hey, what's their multiplier? A usual blockbuster is about a 2.5 multiplier. Like if you look at Marvel movies, usually you take the first weekend numbers, multiply it by 2.5, and that's what the total run they're going to have, right? And so we kind of look at this. So we realize, hey, 30% is, the first day, and where do we go from there? Now, if we go the other way and look at the last day, because let's be honest, that last day is when things get exciting. Like, come on. I mean, I know when we finally got Lady J on the Snow CAT, I'm like, we got it before the last day. There's going to be a lot of people that fear missing out's really going to hit. Because the fear missing out really does hit. And yes, I know they saved some sales because of international and our partners kind of stuff. Now, let's look at the last day numbers. Now, I could do the approximate last 2 days numbers because I think that's more indicative of the late surge, because you have that night before and the thing there. So if you look at those numbers for the last 2 days, you got about 6,500 for the last 2 days with the His tank. You got about 6,000 the last couple of days of the Dragonfly, about 7,500 with the Rattler, which is a lot, and then 6,300 with the Snow CAT. So the numbers the last couple of days are pretty similar. Now, if we start looking at the actually last day, when that really FOMO really hits, where people are like, I don't want to miss out on the cool stuff. This is interesting because if you start looking at it, the His tank, 5,200 sale, 5,200 units sold, basically the last day. The Dragonfly only had 2,500 the last day. However, I feel like the Dragonfly might have, it wasn't until 11:59 p.m. It might have been earlier in the day. Because if you look at the 2-day numbers, it kind of matches better. The Rattler had 5,600 the last day, and the Snow CAT had about 5,400 the last day. So last day stuff for the Rattler and the Snow CAT. Rattler, huge success. Snow CAT, not such a huge success. The approximate last days were pretty close. So we look at in terms of the last day, because remember, we went for the first day percentage, all about, that 30%, 35%. Rattler was only 25%. But if we look at the last day percentage, okay, so the His tank, last day was about 20% of their sales. Dragonfly, because that thing was only 10%, which is like, oh, that's interesting. The Rattler was 21% of their sales. And this is where the Snow Cat FOMO really kicked in, because all that bad press, all that stuff people like threw at the Snow Cat, when they finally realized, oh, the tiers are happening. I guess all those times I said, unless I get all the tiers, I'm not going to buy it. Well, then it hit. And then the fear of missing out, the FOMO hit in. And they had 33%, literally 33% of the sales for the Snow Cat were in the last day. So that's actually more than the first day sales. That is not typical. Like, that's one of those things that Hasbro's like, we got them. We understand what's there. So you got to think about these things. But if we're going to start looking at like the numbers, like comparison wise, in terms of like the dollar amounts. So the Rattler on its first day made 2.8 million. First day made 2.8 million. Last day, 1.5 million. The Dragonfly, its first day, 2.3 million. Last day, because remember it was only that 10%, about 690,000, right? 691,000. The Rattler, first day, $2.2 million. The last day, $1.8 million. So, hey, good days there. And then you have the Snow Cat, this outlier. Where the first day they raked in about $1.65 million. And the last day they got like over $1.75 million. So it's really kind of interesting to see, like, man, that's a nice little chunk of change they're bringing in. Now, I realize that that's not the profit margin on these things. I've said that before, but it's important to mention. So now let's focus on the kind of percentage change in actual money that came in, revenue that came in for each of these Haslabs. So when we look at going from the His Tank to the Dragonfly. So Dragonfly sold 2,000 less units, was also priced $25 less a pop. And in terms of money, they were down 15%. Manageable, but down 15% in terms of the money side of it. Now, what comes next, you go from a $275 Dragonfly to a $325 Rattler. Well, guess what? They were up 28%. Rattler sold about 2,000 more units, and it was, $50 more a pop. So it did make quite a bit more money. 28% more money is quite a bit. Now, when we look at the volume, that's a little different. But we look at the money, you had more units sold and a higher price point. So that's going to be quite a bit. Now, of course, since the Rattler was kind of like the most successful money-wise, obviously the Snow Cat, which wasn't quite there, you really start to see where the bottom line hit is going to be with the Snow Cat, which I think this is what Haslab will look at, because we look at is, hey, how much money was the difference than last year? An iconic vehicle that everybody's asking for versus something we kind of surprised people with. In terms of money, same price point, but the numbers were so much lower. We're talking like 10,000 lower. It was a drop of 39%. In terms of volume year over year, not volume, in terms of revenue on the Haslab. Like that's something that every boss goes, hey, that's a 39% drop. What's going on? Like that's something you have to kind of think about. Now, if we look in terms of volume is a slightly different story, because remember the His Tank to Dragonfly, the drop in money was 15%. However, the price tag was lower. So the actual volume number, instead of being 15%, it was only down 7.5%. Which for a His Tank, which is super popular, for a Dragonfly, popular but not as popular, I would take that for someone out there. Now remember, we had that 28% jump in revenue from Dragonfly to the Rattler. Well, and if you factor in the price and you just look at the volume, it was just up 8.6%, which is right about where the His Tank numbers were, right? So you have that. But then, of course, you had the same price point for the Rattler as the Snow Cat, so obviously the same kind of 39% drop in terms of volume. And these are the things that really open companies' eyes. So they look at these numbers and say, hey, how much money did we make? What did we learn here? Well, I'm looking at these numbers and I'm seeing, based on His Tank, Dragonfly, Rattler, and Snow Cat, honestly, iconic status is important. Okay? Having iconic status will get people to buy. Number 2, tiers. Do tiers matter? And you know what? Tiers might not matter as much as we think, because the Rattler had, the patches, and the Snow Cat didn't really have any figures that really inspired people, but it still made. So if we're thinking that next year's Haslab will have better tiers, I think it won't be like every tier is fantastic, but I think they will realize we need to at least have that inspirational 4th tier or 3rd tier, whatever the last tier is, to get people to go. I think they've learned that one. So we'll see how that goes, because you can't have a 40% drop in sales and a 40% drop in volume year over year and not do something. I mean, as much as people like to make fun of the marketing department at Hasbro, they're not stupid. they learn for this. And we saw this. We saw where the night before, the Snow CAT finished, they sent out an email. I got an email saying, "Hey, your Rattler's it will be on the way by the end of August." So I'm like, oh, so there's people saying, "Oh, until I get my Rattler, I'm not going to buy it." They did that. They did a live feed where they went through they went through a lot of questions and really showed off the Snow CAT. Something that people were like, "Hey, we need more information. Give us more." And Lenny and Emily, they did a great job of kind of giving those things. Right. And they teased some other things. They couldn't tell you about the Arctic Kiss. They could only tell that Cobra Commander may have said something. Right. So that's one of those things. So they're learning, but I think we do need to give the Hasbro team a little bit of, leeway. Because let's be honest. Have you ever worked someplace where literally half your colleagues got laid off the last few years? Could you imagine how depressing it must be to work there? You work in a toy company, which is supposed to bring happiness. I mean, come on. How many of you have your snow job and it still brings you happiness? Or maybe you found that Steel Core Commander that you didn't realize was super cool, right? And so you have that, but you got to think it's got to be a tough time there. So I think these numbers really will help kind of make a determination. So just based on this, I'm looking at this and I see 2026, they're going to go back to an extremely, nostalgia hitting, iconic thing. What is that going to be? Will it be the Mauler? I mean, it's not going to be the Mobat. You don't put Steeler out and then put the Mobat the next year. That's not happening. Is it going to be the Havoc? Maybe. So you have to think about what's something truly iconic. And that's what I want you to put down below. What do you think the iconic Haslab is going to be next year? Is it going to be a Conquest, X30? Or is it going to be a Moray, which I hope it is? Or are they going for the big white whale of the whale, the killer whale? I mean, that's where I could see if they decide to go in terms of the, water-based thing and they want to really rack up the money while the line is still popular. I think the whale would be the best bet. Now, getting it to work and the price point kind of stuff, and I'm tired of people saying, "Oh, they can't go that high." It's $450 for the the Star Wars stuff, and it's even more for some of these Transformer ones. So I don't think the price points. It is an issue, but I think it's one of those things. If it's something people really want, like the whale, I could see a whale maybe not getting Rattler numbers, but I could see it doing like Dragonfly numbers, or at least definitely better than Snow CAT numbers, because that's something those people are really clamoring for. Now, Mauler, also, I could see a Mauler doing, his tank numbers maybe up there. So I think that could be it. So I think you're going to see something very much on there. Now, I know they've said we like to go back and forth, but I think after the Snow CAT, everything's on the table, because they've talked about, remember they said, "Oh, Snow CAT's too small and the, Thunder Machine is too small for these kind of things." But in reality, they've now said, "Hey, anything could be a Haslab project." So maybe it would be the Thunder Machine. I mean, Thunder Machine would fit. I think a Thunder Machine would probably get 25,000 units sold. It's a very popular product. People really like it. There's enough people that maybe are outside of Joe's that like to have like the punk rock kind of stuff that might work for. And I know other places like the Valaverse and these guys and Ramen Toys got some really cool stuff. They could put out things like it, but let's be honest. You want the Dreadnought Thunder Machine with the Cobra logo on it, with the Hasbro stuff, because that's what you are. Because as many people that do buy it, and I've gotten custom stuff, and I've gotten Valaverse, and I've gotten other things, I want the G.I. Joe version. And the normie, they want the G.I. Joe version. So I think if you're looking at three things that can guarantee them a huge return next year, you're looking at the Whale, you're looking at the Mauler, and you're looking at the Thunder Machine. And though the Thunder Machine, I think, would be a great retail or maybe Pulse exclusive kind of thing, or fan exclusive kind of thing, I think it's going to be one of those three. That would be my best. So what I'd like you to tell me is, what did you think about the numbers for the Haslab this year and versus the other years? And what do you think next year's is going to be? Let us know in the comments below, and I wish you a great day, and I'll say bye from here in my office, enjoying my own little G.I. Joe fun.